The first sign that something was wrong was a real estate listing. I was sitting at my kitchen table one Saturday morning when a friend sent me a message. He said, "Is your cabin for sale?" I laughed. My cabin? For sale? I opened the link, and there it was. A beautiful listing for my private mountain cabin. The photos were real. The address was real. Even the description mentioned the fireplace, the lake view, and the private road leading to the property. But there was one problem. I had never listed my cabin. I hadn't hired an agent, and I definitely wasn't selling it. I immediately called the real estate agent shown on the listing. She sounded confused. She told me the property had been submitted through information provided by the local HOA. That's when my stomach dropped. I owned the cabin. The deed was in my name. The taxes were paid by me, and the HOA had never had permission to sell it. I called the HOA president. She didn't sound surprised. Instead, she told me the listing was part of a community property management process. I asked her a simple question. What community property? She replied that the cabin was allegedly subject to HOA control because it was located near the neighborhood's private access road. I told her that didn't give them ownership of my cabin. She became defensive. Then she said something I'll never forget. Maybe you should review your community documents. So I did. I pulled out every document I had. The original purchase agreement, the deed, the property survey, the tax records, and the recorded easement documents. I spent the entire evening going through them, and eventually I found what I was looking for. The HOA had an easement for limited road access. That's it. They could use a specific road under specific conditions. They didn't own my cabin. They didn't own my land. And they certainly didn't have the authority to put my property on the market. The next morning, I drove to the cabin. There was an HOA maintenance truck parked near the entrance. I watched two workers unloading equipment. I asked them what they were doing. They said they had been instructed to prepare the property for inspection. I told them to leave. They immediately called the HOA president. Within minutes, my phone rang. She accused me of interfering with HOA operations. That's when I gave her my answer. I own the property. Then I locked the gate. Not as a threat, not to cause trouble. I simply secured my private property. The HOA suddenly realized they couldn't just drive onto the cabin grounds whenever they wanted. But the story was about to get much bigger. My attorney contacted the real estate agent. He provided the deed and official property records. The listing was immediately questioned. Then the agent asked the HOA for documentation, proving they had authority to sell the cabin. They couldn't provide it. Instead, they sent another set of community documents. My attorney reviewed them carefully, and that's when he found the problem. The HOA had apparently been using an old property map that made the cabin appear connected to community-owned land. But the official county records showed something completely different. The cabin was privately owned. The HOA's access rights were limited, and their documents did not give them authority to sell, transfer, or advertise the property. The listing disappeared. But I wasn't satisfied. I wanted to know how my private property ended up on the market in the first place. So we requested the records showing who submitted the listing information. That investigation revealed that the HOA had provided the property details to the agent. The president claimed it was an administrative mistake. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But either way, the HOA had crossed a line. At the next board meeting, I walked in carrying the original deed. The room became quiet. I placed the deed on the table. Then I placed the property survey beside it. Finally, I placed a printed copy of the real estate listing in front of the HOA president. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten anyone. I simply asked one question. Where, exactly, does this document give you permission to sell my cabin? Nobody answered. The president looked down at the papers. The board attorney started reviewing the documents, and within minutes, the entire story changed. The HOA acknowledged that the cabin was privately owned and that the listing had not been authorized by the property owner. The listing was removed, the records were corrected, and the HOA was instructed to stop representing private property as community property. As for the gate, it stayed locked. The HOA still had the limited access rights actually recorded in the easement, but nothing more. They couldn't turn an easement into ownership. They couldn't turn a mistake into a sale. And they couldn't put someone else's property on the market just because an old map made things convenient. I still own that cabin today. Every time I drive through that gate, I remember the lesson. Before you let someone tell you what they can do with your property, check what the documents actually say. Because sometimes the person holding the loudest rule book isn't the person who owns the land. And sometimes all it takes to expose the truth is one deed, one lock gate, and a careful look at the records. If you enjoyed this HOA story, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.